By now, you're an old pro at getting a pre-flight briefing. But when you're getting a briefing for an IFR flight, you have a few more things to think about. For instance, you now need to pay attention to the FDC NOTAMs. Plus, you want to know more about the two real weather risks for IFR flying: thunderstorms and icing. So let's stick our toes in and wade through some of the things you won't want to miss in your pre-flight briefing, starting with the weather stuff. Both the Flight Service Station briefings and the DUOT reports start with the big picture, the synopsis and the area forecasts. For an IFR trip, what you especially want to get from these sections are the location of the systems influencing the weather, how widespread they are, and which way they are moving. You'll use this information to make final decisions about your route and to decide where you're going to look for IFR alternates. Use these sections also to tell you about where there is good VFR weather. That knowledge is your ace in the hole if all your avionics take a hike. By the way, if you do have that kind of emergency, you'd really appreciate being able to pull out written notes or a printed hard copy. Your memory may have a data dump just at the time you need that information the most. Now, when thunderstorms are forecast, it usually means a change in your plans. As a VFR pilot, there are times when you can easily steer clear of isolated thunderstorms while flying in good VFR conditions. When you're in the clouds IFR, it's a different story. Airplanes like your Skyhawk don't have weather avoidance radar and are not equipped to avoid thunderstorms that are embedded in the clouds. So if your briefing suggests embedded thunderstorms in an area, you'll want to stay well clear of that weather, no matter how few or isolated they are forecast to be. Severe weather outlooks, severe weather warnings, convective SIGMETs, and radar reports all will give you clues in your search for that nasty weather. If there's visible moisture, that means clouds, snow, and rain, and the winds and temperatures aloft forecast indicates the temperature for your altitudes will be from freezing to about minus 15 degrees Celsius, you can assume that icing could be present. And since your Skyhawk doesn't have anti-icing or de-icing equipment, you want to check the PIREPs, AirMets, and SIGMETs and ask about forecast and known icing conditions. If it looks like icing is possible, you just don't want to be there. So pick a different route or altitude. And if that won't work, cancel the trip. Now, when you're looking at the forecast for your destination, compare the actual weather to the forecast. If the current conditions don't agree with what was forecast for that time, it should send up a red flag for you. What that means is you can't count on the exact timing of any forecast improvement in the weather. Try to figure out how this difference between the actual and forecast weather relates to the big picture. If you can understand what is causing the difference, it might help you come up with alternative plans. Now, when you check the NOTAMs for an IFR flight, you're concerned with different issues than for a VFR flight. When you were checking the NOTAMs for your VFR flights, you took particular note of temporary flight restrictions, parachute jumping, and things like that. But for an IFR flight, you have other concerns. You want to know if they've closed the ILS runway, or if the localizer or the nav aid for another approach is out of service. You also want to know if anything's wrong with the approach lighting. Now, about those FDC NOTAMs. FDC stands for Flight Data Center, and FDC NOTAMs are there to tell you about regulatory things like changes to airways and approach procedures that may have come up since your charts and AFD were published. So are they important? You bet they are. The FDC NOTAMs are the way you'll learn that they raised the MDA at your destination because last week someone erected a radio tower near the final approach course. Yes, I guess you would want to know that. These all-important FDC NOTAMs are printed out automatically in a DUOT route briefing. But if you are getting your weather briefing from an FSS specialist, You won't get all the FDC NOTAMs, so if you want them all, you have to ask for them. You already know about GPS NOTAMs. If you have an IFR GPS on board, make sure you check them so you know about any changes. You know that places like Los Angeles International often have ATC delays, especially when a busy metropolitan area goes IFR. But since you have no intention of trying to fit in with the big guys landing at, say, LAX, is there any reason you need to check the ATC delay section of your briefing? Well, you may be surprised to find a typical general aviation community airport, El Monte, in that section. Why? Because El Monte sits under the LAX approach corridor. If El Monte were your destination, you'd like to know about any delays ahead of time. That would let you plan your fuel load to allow for the delay. That way, you won't have to explain a low fuel emergency later on. Any delays at a major airline terminal will usually affect the general aviation traffic in that same area also. So now you know that the difference between an IFR weather briefing and a VFR one isn't so much what you get in the briefing, but what you get out of it.